A man and a woman check each other out in a public pool. They are beautiful and attractive at the same time. The man moved and sat next to the woman. He wanted to kiss her, but she refused. A few minutes later, the woman kissed him on the cheek and jumped into the pool. It did not appear on the woman's face, but the water was red, causing panic. When the woman appeared, she was already pregnant. People around the pool helped him and he was born immediately. On that day, 43 women gave birth, and none of them conceived for a day. Billionaire and adventurer Sir Reginald Hargreaves chose to find and adopt as many of the 43 babies as he could. Reginald only got 7. He took care of 7 babies to give them a better future. All 7 of them lead extraordinary lives. There was Luther, who had unusual muscles and was physically bigger and stronger than the rest of the group. He is number 1 and is the leader of the pack. Diego, the superhero, is fast and agile. His specialty is throwing knives. He lives as a vigilante, and when he sees the news on TV that Hargreaves is dead, he breaks up a home invasion and robbery. Allison is a famous movie star. She is capable of doing whatever her husband tells her to do. But she can't keep her marriage together, and she refuses to use her powers, let alone take care of her children. When Hargreaves' death was announced to the media, he was on the red carpet. Klaus, an alcoholic, checks in with rehab. If he is drunk, his ability to see and talk to the dead does not bother him. He was in the back of an ambulance after hearing of Hargreaves' death after an overdose. Violinist Vanya is the only one of 7 adopted sons without superpowers, so he went out among the children. The rest had to be drawn with a pen when they had matching tattoos to show they belonged to the group. Vanya wrote the autobiography of the group about life in the Umbrella Academy, which was ridiculed among the other members of the group. The 5th child is only the 5th number. He has no name because Hargreaves never gave names to children. They obey him and have no descendants. Number 5 disappeared 16 years ago when he was 13 years old. When the news of Reginald's death spread, they all went about their business. The news spread like wildfire. People didn't hesitate to ask how he felt and if they would attend his father's funeral. Vanya arrived at the Umbrella Academy. Vanya called her mother, but she didn't want to talk. Allison greets Vanya and hugs her. Diego, on the other hand, tells Vanya that she shouldn't have come. He went to Reginald's room and saw Luther coming out. Diego said that Luther had checked everything and gave Reginald the autopsy report. Reginald died of a heart attack. There was no reason to search his room because no one had killed him. A man named Pogo found Reginald dead, but Luther had talked to Pogo. He told Luther that Reginald did not have a monocle. Luther knew that Reginald was not alone when he died and someone took the monocle. Diego didn't care about Reginald's monocle. Hating men, he told Luther that he had gotten what he deserved. Vanya went to the building's library and found all her old things. A monkey enters the room and welcomes Vanya home. This is Pogo. Vanya asks Pogo if he has read Reginald's autobiography, but Reginald replies that he never has. She asked Pogo how long the 5 had been missing. Pogo said the 5 were missing for 16 years, 4 months and 14 days. Pogo followed Reginald's request. Vanya kept on ringing. She had even put out food for 5 people, and Pogo remembered how he found food all over the place. Allison visits Reginald's study, remembering that Reginald had no time for them, that he was always working, that he didn't even have time to say goodnight. He entered the study and heard Klaus talking around Reginald's desk. Klaus and Allison followed as Luther entered the room. He knew he had to go, but Luther ordered him to return the stolen goods. Klaus emptied his pocket and left, but Luther didn't hesitate to check on him. Klaus still managed to steal something from Reginald's research. When he left the room, he took out a golden book. Luther asks Allison where Patrick and Claire are. Patrick said he filed for divorce 8 months ago and won custody of Claire. Luther orders Allison to use her abilities, but she refuses. 5 got changed and went to the library. He told Vanya that Reginald eventually read her book. It seems Vanya spilled their family's secrets in her autobiography, which caused problems for everyone. 5 tells Vanya that far worse things could have happened, but they didn't. Vanya knew that 5 was talking about one of their siblings, Ben. Ben died a long time ago, and it seems his death has something to do with Vanya's autobiography. After their talk, Vanya and 5 joined everyone else in the courtyard. They held Reginald's memorial service, and Pogo said a few words. Diego didn't feel any love or grief in Reginald's passing. He told everyone that Reginald was one of the bad people on Earth and the worst father anyone could ever have. Diego continued ranting about Reginald and how he didn't bother to give them real names. Luther told Diego to stop talking and pay respects to Reginald, but he didn't heed his warning. Luther engages Diego, and Pogo tells them to stop, but that doesn't do anything. Nobody could stop Diego and Luther from killing each other. Luther kept throwing his punches and eventually hit Ben's statue. The statue fell to the ground and lost its head. 5 and Allison couldn't watch Diego and Luther, so they went back into the house. Diego threw one of his daggers at Luther, and it just missed his left bicep by a few inches. Luther was shocked by Diego's dagger and immediately went inside the house. Vanya followed Luther and Diego brought their mother inside. Klaus stayed behind and began talking to Reginald's ashes. He told Reginald that things were going smoothly, just like old times. Reginald pushed all of his children through various training exercises. They fought against one another to gain Reginald's favor and become the best child in the academy. Vanya sat back and watched as her siblings clawed through each other to make Reginald proud. Back at the academy, Vanya decides to leave because she doesn't belong there. Pogo tells Vanya that the academy is also her home and that Reginald loved her in his way. Since Vanya left, everyone decided to leave as well. Five took the academy car to get a cup of coffee because there weren't any in the academy. Klaus left with Diego, and Allison left on her own. Luther decided to stay and mend his wound while their mother sat in the hallway and started charging herself. It turns out that their mother is an android created by Reginald. Meanwhile, Five enters a donut shop to get some coffee. Another man enters the shop, and the waitress thinks they are together. Five orders a cup of coffee, and the man decides to pay for it. Five noticed that the man works for a towing company. He asks the man if he knows his way around the city. The man confirms as he's been driving in the city for 20 years. Five was pleased as he needed to find an address. The man leaves, and armed men enter the donut shop. Five knew who they were as they pointed high-caliber rifles in his direction. They ordered Five to surrender and come quietly, but he wasn't going to do as told. Five uses his powers to teleport in and out of the shop while slowly killing everyone in sight. They did their best to bring Five down, but they were no match for his power. He predicts every move and eventually kills everyone. After the fight, Five took a knife and removed an implant from his arm. It was a tracking device, and the armed men used it to track his location. Diego stops via the river to throw away Reginald's monocle. Klaus tells Diego that they have been starving. Pointing out a random individual he became sitting with behind Diego's vehicle. The man or woman seems to be Ben's spirit. Klaus ought to see and talk to Ben, although he wasn't very responsive. Diego drops the monocle into the river and decides to get returned to paintings. He receives a transmission on his radio that gunshots had been heard from a donut safe in town. Diego drops Klaus off at the train station and drives away. Vanya arrives at her rental, wherein Five is anticipating her. Five tells Vanya that she's the handiest person that he may want to accept at the moment. Vanya became normal, and because of this, no one became interested in her. Additionally, Five knows that Vanya will listen to him. Vanya went to the medication box to grab a bunch of stuff to ease up Five's wounds. He tells Vanya that he did not locate anything whilst he jumped into the future. The arena was destroyed, and as far as he's worried, he became the only individual left alive. Five didn't discover anything useful besides the date whilst it all happened. Five tells Vanya that the arena will lead to 8 days, and he doesn't understand a way to forestall it. Vanya couldn't do anything but provide Five a pot of espresso. Five explains to Vanya about what happened in the past. A flashback follows, where all 7 children are called to breakfast, so they went downstairs to join Reginald. They eat quietly, minding their own business when Five gets Reginald's attention. He expresses his intentions of time traveling to his father. Reginald doesn't know what would happen to Five's body and mind by jumping from timeline to timeline, which can deeply affect him, so he refuses. Five couldn't understand the wisdom behind the refusal as he is still very young and chooses not to listen to Reginald. Five attempts an escape on the sidewalk and jumps through time with his powers. He jumps from one season to another and ends up in an apocalypse. Five returned home, but there was nothing left. Everything is ruined while some houses are still burning. He tries to call out for help and to seek anyone alive apart from him, but no one answers. Five uses his power to return to his timeline, but some mysterious thing prevents him from jumping. Five realizes that he is now stuck in that timeline, and he feels perplexed and troubled. Five tells Vanya how he survived and what he did for that. Vanya is dumbfounded as it's a lot for her to digest and finds everything hard to understand at first. She asks Five to get some rest, and they'll carry out the tales of his adventures in the morning. Five takes an eyeball out of his pocket and reads the inscription behind it. Knowing that time was of the essence, he leaves without informing Vanya. Meanwhile, a man, Hazel, and a woman, Cha-Cha, arrive at a motel. They ask for their reservations and receive their package. Hazel takes the package and goes to their room with Cha-Cha. Cha-Cha complains about their messy room and the cut on their wages, but Hazel doesn't give much attention to it. She opens their package that has the necessary equipment of their need. Hazel checks their tracker to locate their target, which turns out to be number 5, and unloads their gear. 5 has left his tracker at the shop, currently full of cops now. A waitress, Agnes, is interviewed by Detective Patch as the prime witness of this case. Agnes tells him about everything. She also confesses to converse with another detective. It makes Patch realize the truth of what's going on. While Diego tries to escape from the back door after talking to Agnes, he finds out that Patch is already waiting to capture him. He gets arrested by Patch, who also abducts his radio. It turns out that Diego and Patch already know each other. However, Patch informs him of him not being part of the police force anymore. Diego offers his help to her, but she refuses. Hazel and Cha-Cha arrive at the scene to analyze the situation. Back at the academy, Luther walks into Allison's room, who is preparing her bags to leave the place. Allison expresses her wish to introduce him to her daughter, Claire. Luther hesitates because he thinks that she wouldn't recognize him, to which Allison reveals that she has always told Claire stories about him and how she looks up to him. Luther feels proud, but at the same time he also has a commitment to find Reginald's monocle. Allison feels disappointed about Luther that he couldn't leave his past behind. Luther chose to stay and do Reginald's bidding instead of making a name for himself. Klaus wakes up with a hangover and rummages around the house for things to gamble for some money to buy Pogo walks into Reginald's study room, inspecting to look for any stolen item. Klaus gambles the ornate box that looks like a book and throws its content in garbage. He then takes the money and uses it to buy to satiate his cravings. He gets into real trouble when Pogo tells him to return the content inside the box because it's priceless. Vanya wakes up and finds that Five has gone. Five arrives at the address he was looking for and tries to get information about the owner of the eye, but the person doesn't allow him to know about the patient's records. On hearing this, he goes mad with anger on one of the personnel and threatens to kill him if he doesn't obey him. They are unaffected by his threats and choose to call security, leaving Five no other choice than to leave. Meanwhile, Diego tries to persuade Detective Patch to come with him on his mission, but she refuses and releases him. She put forth a harsh truth to Diego, that the Umbrella Academy failed to achieve its goal, and now he has lost his position as a superhero. Diego leaves the place disappointed. Luther looks for Diego in a gym and finds out from its owner that Diego hasn't come for work for quite some time. The owner further tells him that he is the mop boy there in exchange for a free apartment. Luther finds Diego's apartment, which used to be an old boiler room, and it seems he never moved on from his previous life. Meanwhile, Vanya returns to the academy and finds Five there, but he dismisses Vanya instantly. She asks him to visit a therapist, but Five refuses an excuse from her by saying he needs some rest. Five asks Klaus for help and he wants him to pretend to be his father. Klaus doesn't mind helping Five if he pays him. Meanwhile, Hazel and Cha-Cha go to the tow truck driver. They mistake an old man with Five. The man tells them about Five and what he converse about at the donut shop. Hazel tells Cha-Cha about her theory about Five becoming a child when he time traveled back to his timeline. Hazel and Cha-Cha decide to get more information from the tow truck driver by continuing to torture him. Allison argues with her ex-husband on the phone. Patrick refuses to meet Allison despite what was agreed in court. She wants to talk to Claire, but Patrick ends the call. Vanya overhears the conversation and tells Allison that she's better off staying at the academy than chasing her husband. Allison is offended by Vanya's advice. She wants to be with Claire more than anything in the world and she doesn't want advice from Vanya. Allison describes Vanya as a loner, but that's because Reginald raised her to distance herself from everyone. Allison replies that Vanya is an adult and has no one to blame but herself for her mistakes. Klaus and Five return to the address on the eyeball. It was a prosthesis and Five wants to find the owner, but the staff refuses to give them any information. Klaus punches Five and hits him in the head with a snowball. A staff member named Lance tries to call security, but Klaus already has his plan in motion. Klaus plans to blackmail Lance and blame him for their injuries. Lance doesn't want to end up in jail, so he cooperates and gives them information about the eye's owner. Lance checks the records and discovers that the watch hasn't been made yet. He wants to know where Five got into the eye, but he doesn't tell him. Klaus and Five leave the building because their mission turns out to be a bust. Five tells Klaus why he is determined to find the eye's owner. Klaus doesn't care that the apocalypse is coming. All he cares about is getting his money to buy more. Five gets Klaus to talk about his past relationships and he quickly teleports away from him. Five is already gone when Klaus notices he isn't next to him. Meanwhile, a guy named Leonard knocks on Vanya's apartment. She makes a living teaching the violin. Leonard is eager to learn, but Vanya decides to start with the basics. Diego finally arrives at the gym and quickly goes to his apartment. He notices that someone has entered his apartment, so he slowly opens the door and throws one of his daggers inside. The dagger flew out of the door and headed for Luther. The dagger misses his head by inches and Luther doesn't know until the dagger hits the old dresser. Diego knew it was Luther but threw the dagger anyway. Luther starts to investigate Diego, but he has a clear alibi. He fought in the gym the night Reginald died. Luther doesn't understand why Diego didn't just tell him. Diego replies that he doesn't have to prove his innocence to him. Diego tells Luther to leave, so he stands up and leaves. Leonard doesn't seem to have any trouble learning the violin. He praises Vanya for being a good teacher, but she doesn't know how to take a compliment. After the lesson, Leonard invites Vanya to his woodworking shop in town. Vanya tells Leonard that she is busy, so she immediately throws the invitation away and leaves. Vanya has just proven to herself that Allison was telling the truth. She has learned to shut people down instantly, and that isn't a great skill to pick up. Allison is still at the academy, smoking on the top floor, and Pogo comes. Pogo tells Allison that Vanya sent him to see if she is okay. Allison feels terrible about the things she had said to Vanya earlier. Pogo replies that Vanya is her sister and she would understand that she didn't mean the words she said. Allison still feels bad, so Pogo shows her the surveillance tapes to make her feel better. Pogo kept all the surveillance tapes, even the ones when they were kids. He tells Allison that he goes to watch tapes whenever he feels lonely. Pogo leaves Allison and tells her to lock up when she is done watching. Allison finds a random tape on the monitor. She takes the tape and decides to watch it. However, she finds something that shouldn't have been found. Five teleports to the department store. He walks through the aisles and finds a mannequin he calls Dolores. Earlier, Five tells Klaus that he spent 30 years with a woman named Dolores. Klaus thinks that Dolores is a real woman, but it turns out to be a mannequin that Five found in the apocalyptic timeline. While 5 talks to Dolores, Hazel and Cha-Cha appear. They start shooting at Dolores and blast her to pieces. 5 rescues Dolores and promises to come back for her. Knowing they are fighting someone special, Hazel and Cha-Cha try to outwit 5. He does his best to shoot down Hazel and Cha-Cha but fails. 5 tries to take Dolores and escape, but his powers don't work. Hazel and Cha-Cha corner 5, but the cops arrive. 5 uses the distraction to hide with Dolores. Hazel and Cha-Cha have no choice but to leave. Detective Patch goes to the tow truck garage, but she is too late. She finds the tow truck driver dead, and it seems Hazel went overboard when she was torturing him for information. Diego manages to get another radio and hears Patch calling for backup. Diego doesn't hesitate to answer her call. Meanwhile, Luther returns to the academy where Allison is waiting for him. He thinks that he was wrong about Reginald's death because Diego has nothing to do with it, but on the contrary, he turns out to be right because Allison has found something through the surveillance tapes. She tells Luther to follow her so she could show him. 5 returns to the academy. Allison and Luther go into the surveillance room and ask 5 if he needs help. 5 answers that none of them could do anything. They all died the day 5 entered the apocalyptic timeline. He found Luther's hand holding the prosthetic eye. 5 also found Diego, Allison, and Klaus in the ruins of the academy. At first, he thought they were just ordinary people, until he saw the umbrella tattoos on their arms. 5 years ago, Vanya started out writing her autobiography, which she then completed. It drew in an audience for a while. All her siblings went through the book and felt upset with her. Reginald, without studying this e-book, opened the quilt and placed a few of the other books inside the library. As time went on, people started to forget about Vanya and her e-book. Back in the present, Vanya is living her simple life and attends practice in conjunction with other individuals of the orchestra. At the academy, Luther and Allison watch the surveillance footage that she discovered. Plainly, their mother killed Reginald. Allison thought that their mom wasn't capable of this type of heinous act. But now that they've seen the tape, they don't recognize what to anticipate from her. Luther and Allison go down for breakfast to confront their mother. They ask her if she went to see Reginald the night of his loss of life, however she can't take that into account. Allison asks her if she is ever angry with Reginald. She is about to reply to the question, but she stops mid-sentence, and at once drops the subject. Diego goes over to help Detective Patch together with her investigation. Patch doesn't have any leads, so she now accepts Diego's help. Patch can't function below the radar, so Diego desires to do the grimy paintings for now. Diego insists that he'll hunt down Hazel and Cha-Cha to assist her out. In the meantime, Vanya is having problems within the orchestra. She's been stuck in the 3rd chair for a few years now, and a girl named Helen tells her that it's not just a hobby anymore. She gives Vanya a few recommendations. She either gives this her all, or finds something else to be obsessed with. Vanya doesn't take the recommendation gently. She feels out of her league once more, despite being a part of the Umbrella Academy. Hazel and Cha-Cha have been taking a lead on searching 5. They receive a notification that they may lose a percentage in their pay for every day that passes until they hold the activity. Cha-Cha doesn't feel okay with the pay loss. However helpless as he is, he can't do anything about it. Hazel orders him to stop whining and focus on killing 5 as quickly as feasible. 5 leaves the academy after taking his belongings with him. He sees Klaus on his way out, and he's dumpster diving to locate the contents of the container that he threw away. Klaus desires to accompany 5 to any place he comes, but 5 refuses. 5 returns to Maritech in a stolen van. He camps out inside the van just outside, awaiting any clues concerning the prosthetic eye that he got from the Apocalypse timeline. Allison and Luther argue whether their mom, Grace, is hiding something. Luther thinks that Grace knew what she was doing primarily based on the pictures they found. Allison believes that Grace is just confused due to the fact they deserted her after everything she did for them. Luther changes the topic by asking Allison what occurred to her own family. She tells Luther that she used her powers on Claire so that she could obey her, which took matters out of hand. And rather than being a one-time element, she continuously used her powers on Claire. Allison regrets the use of her powers on Claire and decides never to use it again. She is attempting to start her life over, again with her. Luther tells Allison that the whole thing is a little complicated. Vanya feels depressed about her present-day situation and goes over to Leonard's timber store to ease her thoughts off matters. Leonard confirmed Vanya around or even gave her a wooden carving and expresses his gratitude towards her. He invites Vanya for dinner, and she accepts the invitation. Allison also joins them there, and Vanya introduces Leonard to Allison. She tells Vanya that they want her back at the academy. Leonard asks Vanya to see her later at dinner and leaves. Allison apologizes to Vanya for what came about the previous day, and they decide to go to the academy together. 5 sits outside Maritech while Klaus and Luther locate him. Luther tells 5 that they want him in the house to discuss Reginald's demise and Grace's involvement with it, and 5 gives his suggestion a thought. Meanwhile, Hazel and Cha-Cha have been getting closer to locate 5. They go to Agnes at a donut shop for further investigation. She can't provide them with any details about 5's appearance. However, she gives them the umbrella tattoo that 5 has on his arm. Luther shows the footage to each person and thinks Grace killed Reginald, but Diego factors out that Reginald died independently. Grace goes over to take his monocle and Diego knows it because he took it from her. Diego knows that Luther will lose his patience if he sees the monocle with Grace's assets. Luther demands the monocle from Diego, but he responds that he already threw it away. Luther and Diego are about to go toe-to-toe once more, however, absolutely everyone told them to stop. The siblings take a vote in favor of shutting Grace down or not. Luther and Allison vote to shut her off, but Vanya, Diego, and Klaus think the opposite. 5 isn't there and Allison suggests Diego to look for 5 because they owe it to him. Vanya thinks that Grace was programmed to act like their mother, and Diego agrees that he had the same feeling to begin with. However, he knew that Grace had evolved and turned out to be herself. Diego goes back to his room and recollects all the suitable times he spent with Grace. She became the best ever support to every person, and he always felt that she turned into his mother. Diego goes to Grace to confront her that he knows that it would be normal if she had ill feelings towards Reginald, given that he handled her like crap. Grace responds with nothing but admiration for Reginald, and she defends him even if he doesn't deal with her with care. Diego stops pestering Grace as their conversation is leading nowhere. In the meantime, 5 is nevertheless busy camping out at Meritech. He subsequently receives a lead and proceeds to comply with it as Lance comes out of the construction and palms a health club bag over to a random automobile that pulled over in front of the power. As Hazel and Cha-Cha arrive at the academy, matters get messy. They wreck into the academy and find a portrait of 5, which confirms they were inside the proper vicinity. Klaus no longer feels that his powers are useful and lays low with the spirits that he should see and hear. In the meantime, Hazel and Cha-Cha slowly walked into the academy, looking for 5. Allison and Luther are having their moment when they hear gunshots coming from their bedrooms. In the hallway, Hazel and Cha-Cha get spotted by Diego. He tries to take them away, but he can't win against machine guns. Allison and Luther arrive just in time and save Diego. Hazel and Cha-Cha don't know who they are up against, but they continue with their assignment. Hazel chases Allison around the residence as Luther steps in to combat Cha-Cha. Cha-Cha almost kills Vanya as she is going into the library looking for her siblings. Hazel wins her combat against Allison, but she nevertheless needs to face Diego. In the long run, Hazel can't manage to combat them each and gets injured through Diego's knife. Luther thinks that he took care of Cha-Cha, but he underestimated him. Cha-Cha turns the fight round when Luther is looking for Vanya. Allison and Diego come to Luther's useful resource. However, Hazel drops the chandelier on them. Luther pushes Diego and Allison away so that they don't get hit by the chandelier. Luther eliminates his armor and shows every person his natural body. It becomes ugly and bushy. Luther feels ashamed of his body, so he goes back to his room while Hazel and Cha-Cha leave the residence. Diego goes over to test on Grace and requests her if she heard whatever that went down. Grace doesn't pay attention whatsoever, and Diego spreads out Grace's arm to access her control panel. He shuts her off with a heavy heart as he knows that she isn't functioning correctly. Allison felt they were lucky to be alive. Diego tells Vanya that she must go away because she could have been killed or gotten them killed. Allison also warns her that it will be risky for her to be around them. Vanya feels offended as she isn't like the others and leaves without saying anything. Allison tries to reason with Vanya, however Diego is aware that it's far more secure for her to depart. Vanya leaves the academy and moves towards Leonard's house, and Leonard welcomes her into his house. Cha-Cha goes back to their lodge room and waits for Hazel to reach. Hazel is in awful form as she was hit with Diego's knife. Cha-Cha manages to kidnap Klaus earlier than leaving the academy. 7 years ago, Luther was left as the only one who was determined to stay with Reginald and continue supporting his missions. He was having a quiet day to himself until Reginald dispatched him on a mission. On returning back to the academy, he had extreme burns throughout his body. Reginald opted to inject him with the serum to restore the cells of his body and revive his existence. Luther survived, but his body had turned grotesque and bushy. In the present, Allison observes Grace on her chair with her panel opened and her wirings clipped off. She wakes Luther up to show him Grace's condition, not knowing that Diego did that. She then changes the subject and asks Luther what he discovered about himself. He informs Allison about that horrible incident that happened to him and how Reginald saved his life. Allison tries to get closer to Luther so that he can confide in her. However, he doesn't need to and asks Allison to leave him alone. At Leonard's home, Vanya wakes up on the couch, remembering about her practice session, and departs quickly, but she no longer has any of her tablets left. She wishes to get a fill-up from her house, but she is unable to do it because of the time shortage. Leonard says that she'll do better without her pills, offers to take Vanya over to the rehearsals, and asks her out for dinner again. Vanya can't say no as she has already turned down his first invitation. Meanwhile, Hazel and Cha-Cha commence torturing Klaus for facts at the academy, but things don't go as planned, due to the fact that Klaus enjoys what they have been doing to him. He tells them they abducted the wrong man, because he is already long gone, mentally, at least. Hazel and Cha-Cha are unable to understand the things with Klaus because their torture methods have turned out to be ineffective. Hazel reminds Cha-Cha of one of their missions in order that he won't lose hope. Cha-Cha feels motivated as he remembers how they tortured another man for 2 days and continues what they have commenced. Diego has a courting together with Detective Patch and now goes over to her. He tells her about his mother's death and Patch consoles him. However, he doesn't know how to proceed with his emotions. Diego informs her that the two murderers she was searching out for went to his residence, and they have been seeking out 5. He asks Patch to help him locate 5, but she refuses. Patch apologizes for what occurred to Diego's mom and leaves to attend to her paintings. Allison goes over to Vanya's condominium and witnesses someone rummaging through her stuff. When Allison assaults the person, it turns out to be Leonard, who tells her that Vanya left her keys and that he is just going back to her. After knowing that Vanya is at her practice session, Allison finds it bizarre for him to enter her condominium. He tells Allison that he wishes to use the bathroom, and goes inside, which makes Allison more suspicious of him, and she takes the keys back from him. 5 keeps following Lance. He knows that going the superhero route isn't the best alternative, so he threatens the facts out of Lance. He makes him confess his doings in Meritech by putting a knife to his throat. Lance sells prosthetics to faux patients and bills the insurance agency for it. Lance has a list of all his customers in his safe at the facility. 5 doesn't have time to waste, so he tells Lance to pressure him again to the ability. Luther rummages through 5's room at the academy, seeking out clues to his whereabouts. Diego is going over to do the same thing, and he runs into Luther and the two start a contentious discussion, and Pogo feels that they need to stop acting like children. Hazel and Cha-Cha go on a one-of-a-kind technique to torture Klaus after they search through his jacket and find different pills. Cha-Cha destroys all the medications, but they don't know that the chocolate they found in his jacket is rigged with marijuana. Klaus kept those facts to himself as he told Cha-Cha and Hazel about 5's plan and his search for the faux eye. Hazel and Cha-Cha go on to look for the faux eye. Luther and Diego locate 5's truck and go through his things. They find a replica of Vanya's ebook, and they suppose 5 is hiding in Vanya's condominium. Hazel and Cha-Cha arrive at Meritech, set the whole facility with gas and light it up, and wait until the time 5 reaches there. When he gets there, it's too late, as the whole facility is already in flames. He attempts to salvage the situation, but the whole vicinity explodes. After rehearsals, Vanya sees Allison outside the theater, where Allison informs her about Grace and gives Vanya her keys. She asks her to have a drink so that they can talk about Leonard. In the meantime, Hazel and Cha-Cha go back to the donut shop to eat something. Cha-Cha is having a moment. He simply observes his life and feels sorry for all the normal human beings, who have no idea of what is about to happen. Hazel realizes that killing 5 might bring about the world's end. Hazel orders Cha-Cha to get back to Klaus. Klaus can't keep his mind away from the ghosts and continues to hear their voices, and he can't shut them off without his medication. Ben tries to help Klaus by calming him down, however he can't do anything except talk to him. Hazel and Cha-Cha keep Klaus inside their closet. A room cleaner enters the room, but she doesn't hear Klaus crying for help. In the meantime, Detective Patch arrives at Meritech and finds a clue on 5's van. She turns to the resort, wondering if Diego left the clue. Diego and Luther go to the library to find 5. At the same time as they're searching, Diego tells Luther that he left because he grew to become 17. And that's what guys do when they attain a certain age. They go and try to make a call for themselves. Diego knows that Luther can't take the truth that their glory days are behind them. He informs Luther that everyone had their motive for leaving and that he also needs to ask himself the proper question, why he decided to stay alive. Diego explains that they're orphans again since Reginald and Grace had been gone. It's time he comes to a decision whether or not he wants to make a name for himself. They finally locate 5 as they hear someone complaining about a lost child. They go over and find 5 sleeping on the floor beside Dolores. Allison speaks to Vanya about Leonard, but she doesn't agree with Allison because she likes Leonard. She feels that Leonard noticed something in her that no one ever noticed. Allison can understand Vanya because she felt the same way every time Luther was around. In the meantime, Hazel and Cha-Cha go back to their room and take Klaus out of the closet and inquire about 5. They leave the clue on 5's van so that when he comes to rescue Klaus, they could capture him. Klaus, on the other hand, opts to reminisce about the torment he experienced when he was with Reginald. Reginald used to lock Klaus up inside a crypt for him to get over his worry of the dead. Klaus in no way got over his worry. Instead, his fears have become worse. Klaus used to beg Reginald to take him home, but he kept him in the crypt for a few more hours, questioning whether Klaus would recover from his worry. Meanwhile, Detective Patch arrives at the resort, but the motel personnel don't need to assist her. She attempted to name Diego's gym, but he wasn't there. Patch leaves a message for Diego in order that he may want to come and back her up. Diego and Luther are busy looking after 5. He became so drunk that he couldn't solve their questions. However, he told them about Hazel and Cha-Cha. Whilst anticipating 5 to reveal himself, Hazel and Cha-Cha watch as Klaus tries to recover from his fear. He tries to speak to a vintage Russian ghost named Zoya Popova. It seems that Hazel and Cha-Cha killed Zoya, and she couldn't relax till she got her revenge. Klaus tells them about Zoya and about her grudge she feels towards them for killing her. Meanwhile, Allison is going home with Vanya. Vanya gets out with a bouquet, and it appears that Allison thought wrong about Leonard. Vanya thanks Leonard and invites him for breakfast, and he consents. Allison realizes that Leonard did take something from Vanya's apartment. After talking with Vanya over the telephone, he pours Vanya's tablets into the sink. Klaus can now see all of the humans Hazel and Cha-Cha killed. He can even see the tow truck guy. Everybody speaks to Klaus and tells him how Hazel and Cha-Cha killed them. Cha-Cha and Hazel can't understand why Klaus knows they're victims, so they go into the restroom to talk about things. Cha-Cha discovers that Hazel was slacking off on their missions. Cha-Cha feels dissatisfied. However, Hazel promises that she'll do better. Meanwhile, Detective Patch can't wait for Diego any further. She goes and assesses the rooms one at a time and finally finds Klaus. She unfastens him and almost kills Hazel with the technique. Patch thinks Hazel is all by herself, and they catch her off guard. Cha-Cha goes around and kills Patch as Klaus makes his way out. He leaves via the air vent and takes Hazel's briefcase with him. Klaus rides the bus and tries to open the briefcase. He thinks he will discover something valuable inside it, and it turns out to be a teleporter. Klaus opens the briefcase and disappears from the bus. Diego tucks Five into his mattress so he can sleep off his hangover. The proprietor of the gym went over to supply Patch's message. Diego rushes over to the motel, but he's too late. He sees Patch lying dead on the ground. He goes over to make sure, however, Patch is already long gone. The police arrive, and Diego decides to depart and takes a receipt from the resort room. It turns out to be the receipt from the donuts that Hazel had bought in advance.